Hi, everybody. Welcome to the June 24th, 2016 edition of Colorado Inside Out. I'm your host, Dominic Dezzutti. Thank you very much for joining us. First, allow me to explain why we are all in Hawaiian shirts tonight. In 2014, we lost a dear friend of the show, our longtime floor director, Susie Aikman. Because Susie loved and collected Hawaiian shirts, we wore them on a special episode to show we were thinking of her, and we decided that it would become an annual tradition. So we're very happy to have this very good annual tradition in Susie's honor. Let's get with the show. Let's get a quick take on the announcement that Sarah Palin will join Donald Trump in speaking at the Western Conservative Summit here in Denver on July 1st. Patty Calhoun from Westward, Denver is going to be ground zero for the epic circus that will be Donald Trump and Sarah Palin speaking at the same event. Are you looking forward to it?
Oh, yes, we're looking forward to it. I mean, what an unbelievable event to cover. And for the Western Conservative Summit that shamelessly tried to drag Trump here, they succeeded. They're going to have a bigger crowd than ever before, both outside, I'm guessing, and inside.
David Kopel from the Independence Institute and DU Law School. Trump and Palin both come with undeniable popularity, but do you think that it also comes with a certain ability to turn off certain GOP voters when your headliners are Palin and Trump?
I think it makes it hard to take the event seriously when your headliners are people who themselves are not serious. And it makes it all the more harder when it's the Western Conservative Summit. Donald Trump is no conservative. He's a professional narcissist of changeable views. Sarah Palin is a conservative and a Christian, but this is conservative. This is Colorado Christian University, and to put up a guy like Donald Trump at a place that is supposed to promote the Christian virtues, and this guy is the opposite in all of his selfishness and malicious comments about so many people.
Eric Sonman, political analyst. This event comes about 2.5 weeks before the Republican convention, so I imagine there's going to be a lot of attention. It's not just Trump and Palin, but we're pretty close to the convention. What do you think the coverage is going to be like?
Well, I think the coverage is going to be massive, both local coverage and national, international coverage. If Trump and Palin have a sense of humor, maybe they'll do their appearances in Hawaiian shirts. But I find it interesting that they picked, Colorado has always prided itself on being, quote, the most educated state. So we have the Donald Trump, Sarah Palin show coming to our most educated state. Trump is obviously doubling down here. I mean, he is, the typical thing for politicians to do is once they get the nomination is they tack to the center. Not Trump, given that he doesn't have any ideology, the center is wherever he says it is, but they also try to compensate for their perceived weaknesses. And Trump doesn't play that game. He doubles down on the perceived weaknesses. Color me very doubtful that Sarah Palin is going to help him get across the threshold he needs to get across in this state.
And Susan Green joins us from the ColoradoIndependent.com. Susan, Donald Trump, Sarah Palin arriving for an event in Denver. Is this a Democratic negative ad waiting to happen?
I think any event involving Sarah Palin is a Democratic event, ad waiting to happen. I wonder, because it's right before the 4th of July, it's the 1st through the 3rd, how many people will really be paying attention? And I also wonder to what extent Trump will actually get out in the heat, get out in the state and talk to people. I mean, he's not a big favorite in this state. He's done very little campaigning here. I'm curious to see what the support or lack thereof is.
Should be interesting. We're only days away from Colorado's primary election, where Colorado Republicans will select who faces Michael Bennet, and Denver Democrats will select who faces independent candidate Helen Morgan for district attorney. Darrell Glenn secured an endorsement from Senator Ted Cruz this week, and Robert Blaha and Jack Graham continue to hit the TV airwaves with ads. Patty, it's been a pretty sleepy primary season, but now that we're to decision day and all the mail-in ballots coming in, who do you think is going to win in both these big races?
Well, we all know how good I am at predicting these. I think the winners will be the people who remember to get out and vote. And remember, if you're unaffiliated, you can go and affiliate to vote for one of those. It's too late to do it by mail. You'd have to go to a voting center. And if you're not registered yet at all, you can go register on the day of the primary. So we could really up the ante on the number of people who are voting. I've been trying to figure out how many people switched parties, maybe to do a little sneaky subterranean action on this, but I don't have those numbers yet. It's about the same number of Republicans and Democrats who voted so far. The Republican group has been crazy. I mean, when you had Glenn taking off after Kaiser about his military record and then saying, I really didn't have any evidence, but at least people talked about it, that was the biggest misstep he's made so far. Kaiser, of course, has made his own missteps. And for all their ads, which I am hearing or seeing pretty endlessly, I don't see Blaha or Graham really getting traction. But with 5 candidates, it's not going to take much to split it. It could be just one candidate's supporters really getting out, being loyal, and pushing him over.
David, as of taping, the Secretary of State's office reports a little over 20% turnout among Republicans. So far pretty low. You never know how that's going to change the next few days. But from what we've seen so far from the election season, from the proposed turnout, and how this season has been nationally, who has the edge in this 5-person race?
My guess might be Jack Graham. He's one of the two that's really had, along with Blah, put a lot of money into the race for TV, and on something that gets so little coverage, partly to the constriction and near extinction of print media in Colorado. I think that might help a lot, and nobody has really much name recognition. The best thing for the Republicans is that this primary is going to be over in June, which gives whatever unknown candidate wins a chance to get going and start fundraising. It's a big difference from the olden days, say in the 70s, when the primary might be in early September. And so the Republicans would be continuing on this now and not able to start raising the national money to try to take on Bennett, who is the most vulnerable Democratic incumbent in the Senate and could be beaten with a good candidate and a good campaign.
Eric, of the 5 Republicans running the primary, which campaign manager gets the best night's sleep on June 27th?
Oh, probably none of them get a good night's sleep. I've never met a campaign manager who sleeps very well on the night before the election. That's a trick question, Dominic. I'm not going to jump at that one. I echo Patty in the sense that this thing has been very low intensity, low profile, low excitement level. I think a lot of that goes to the presidential race. Trump and all of the wackiness around that whole thing, which continues now, has just taken all of the air out of the balloon. There's just no oxygen left for any of these candidates. And there's not really a top-tier candidate on paper among them. As I've said before, I would anticipate that the winner of this 5-way primary will have maybe 30% of the vote and maybe under 30% of the vote, because they're all going to get a slice of the pie. There's not a token candidate among them. They're all going to get a slice of the pie. I happen to think maybe the more interesting race or the more consequential race over the long term is not that primary where the winner wakes up the next morning facing a fairly substantial, well-funded, entrenched incumbent in Michael Bennett. I think the more interesting one might be the Denver DA's race, where yes, there is an independent candidate waiting in November, but having the Democratic nomination in highly Democratic Denver is a place you want to be. I have no idea how to call that one. Three candidates, all with some claim on it. No idea how to call it. Lastly, I'll make a prediction here, not about this primary, but that come November, the really interesting races in this state are not the presidential race in terms of how close it's going to be, and not the Bennett versus whomever race, but the really interesting races are the 6th congressional district between Morgan Carroll and Mike Kaufman, and a slew of ballot issues, unlike a list that this state has ever seen in terms of the number and the amount of money that's going to be spent total on all of them. That's where the focus is going to be in terms of a late election night come November.
So Susan, take your pick. We have an interesting DA's race. We have an interesting Republican primary. When we're talking about this on June 29th, how do you think it all shakes out?
I think in terms of the Senate race, someone wrote today that the winner of the GOP primary is Michael Bennet. And I think that's true. I think, Michael has $6 million in the bank, and as Eric said, and others have as well, none of these candidates really stand out. None of them are really top-tier candidates. They're not a Cory Gardner. So I don't think he has much to worry about. I think it will be basically a snoozer race, although there's this factor about what happened in 2014 with Mark Udall, that there's this anti-incumbent sentiment in Colorado, and I think if anything, Bennett has to worry about that more than any of these people in particular. I think, as Eric said, the big race really next Tuesday is the DA's race. I would pick, in terms of who I think will win, not in terms of who I would vote for, by the way, is Michael Kerrigan, who has really been able to garner a ton of support from communities of color and various special interest groups. I think has really distinguished himself as by far the most talented retail politician of all of them. But I would remind voters about him that before Black Lives Matter happened, before Ferguson happened, before there was a verdict in the Marvin Booker case, Michael Kerrigan, who's very much talking like a progressive now, really sounded like Mitch Morrissey 2.0. And so I think there's been a massive transformation in his messaging there. And I think the race against Helen Morgan, independent, come November will be fairly interesting.
A sit-in protest by House Democrats lasting over 25 hours made headlines on Thursday this week, reminding some of the protests launched by Republicans in 2008. Meanwhile, a bipartisan bill that would give the Justice Department more leeway in denying those on the no-fly list from purchasing a firearm won a majority vote, but not enough to officially move forward. David, a lot of wacky stuff in Washington, in both the House and the Senate, sit-ins, everything else. Take your pick from what you saw this week.
Well, that bipartisan bill you mentioned was sponsored by Republican Senator John Cornyn of Texas, and it did get a majority, but a Democratic filibuster, and it got, as you said, it got Republican and Democratic votes, but it didn't get all the way to 60. But a Democratic filibuster prevented that from passing, because you need 60 to invoke cloture, which is an example of how this is not a serious issue, except in the political sense. The Democrats wanted to keep this as a political issue because they think it will help them in November, like in 1999 after Columbine, when Congress was ready to pass some restrictions on gun shows, but the Democrats and the Clinton White House kept saying, "Oh no, nothing you can ever give us is ever going to be enough. We will refuse to accept anything you want to do, so we can have the issue around for the next election." In the House of Representatives, there is a procedure if you're a member of the minority party and the majority party isn't bringing up some bill you want. You can have something called a discharge petition. You get 218 signatures on it, which shows you've got the votes to pass it on the floor of the House. And by the rules of the House, that's how you bring something out. And it's been used successfully a variety of times. The rules of the House don't have this temper tantrum sit-in procedure. This is one of the ways where the Democratic leadership in the House is in full alignment with Donald Trump in moving to turn this country into a banana republic. It is disgraceful that Ed Perlmutter, former majority leader of the Colorado Senate, who was a very effective majority leader, a good legislator, and has been his whole career a very serious legislator, participated in this grotesque stunt. And again, something for it's going to fire up their base. They were fundraising over it while it was going on. It's not something serious about trying to actually prevent terrorist attacks. The terrorist in Orlando passed many background checks, including being a licensed security guard for a company, Wackenhut, which is now called D4S, which is a contractor for the Department of Homeland Security. So there's not more background checks that would have done something about Orlando. And what they're fighting for is now they're having sit-ins against civil rights. They want to say that if somebody at the FBI secretly puts you on a list, then they can make it a felony for you to exercise your civil rights. That is not a principle that, if that ever gets established in our law, is going to be limited to the Second Amendment, which I understand they hate that. But President Trump is going to take that principle and apply it in lots of other contexts. And if it's not President Trump, then you'll have some other guy who will do it and abuse it. Martin Luther King used to be a gun owner who was on an FBI list.
Eric, it seemed to me that Democrats have a lot more to gain from publicity than GOP might be losing, but it's late June. The attention span of the national voter isn't terribly long. Do people remember this sit-in in November?
I think some remember this sit-in. Politics these days is basically theater, which is why Trump has risen, because he is basically an actor. And as theater goes, this was pretty good theater. It was compelling. It brought the cameras there. It fired up the social media. To me, it is all testimony to the dysfunction of Washington, that basically we now have government by theater, and we have candidates who, on a daily basis, try to jump to theatrics. David is right in the sense that this has everything to do with November. This is not about forcing a vote in the House. I'm not sure that the Democrats actually really want or expect to vote. This is not about a specific bill. This is all a November strategy. Whenever an incident happens, as tragic as that was in Orlando, as a country now, we immediately go sprinting to our respective corners. And if you're of left of center mind, your corner is gun control. And if you're of right of center mind, your corner is probably immigration policy. And there's very little dialogue between those corners. There's very little dialogue between camps. I find the whole thing distressing. I thought it was effective theater. Did it move the ball forward? In a political sense, yes, but not in a substantive dialogue sense.
Susan, do you think House Democrats or even Senate Democrats are looking to turn the events from this week into more action down the road?
I hope so. I agree with Eric. It was theater. I think it was effective theater. But let's be clear, Democrats also have obstructed gun control for years and even decades. And what's changed this year, not just because of Orlando, but because of what's coming out of Hillary Clinton's mouth, I mean, suddenly she is harnessing and embracing this outrage about gun violence. I think the next step beyond this measure, which this no-fly list, no gun thing, really would not have prevented this catastrophe from happening and many others, is the question of how serious are they willing to get? And what we know works isn't about no-fly lists. What we know works is much more about policing on the ground. It's about identifying the 1 or 2% of at-risk males in cities who are committing gun violence. It's about taking guns out of the hands of domestic abusers. It's about limiting high-round magazines. We know those things work. On the 1 to 2% of high-risk males, that's a tough thing to do in this country. There's so much bad faith between police and communities of color that it's very hard for police to get into these communities and convince the communities, yes, you need buy-in on this. We want to go after these 1 to 2% of at-risk males, and for the communities to embrace that requires a lot of reconciliation and a lot of sort of discussion that has not happened either in the presidential race or really in the Obama administration. So I hope that something does happen in the next 4 months. I sort of doubt that it will.
Patty, I think we know where dyed-in-the-wool the Democrats believe how the sit-in went and how Republicans felt. But when you look at the independents, both in Colorado and the nation, who decide the elections, how do you think they respond to seeing the events from this week?
I think they would have preferred to see the Democrats go sit in at the FBI headquarters and Homeland Security, where if they had done their job really vetting the killer, they would have found out a lot of things. There were warnings. There was one person who wouldn't let him go on a security force. There were plenty of warnings out there. Well, however you feel about guns aside, there were warnings that we should have caught this guy. It's a topic we could talk about for another 25-hour sit-in, but I just think it was too much theater, not enough substance. We'll be talking about guns plenty, though, with Hillary's position, with Trump meeting with the NRA. There will be no shortage of discussion.
The Denver Post announced this week that 20 members of its newsroom, including editorial page editor Vincent Carroll and longtime TV critic Joanne Osho, will leave the Denver Post in buyout packages. Political editor Chuck Plunkett will take over the editorial page as of July 2nd. Eric, we've lamented the shrinking Denver Post at this table for a long time, but this was I think a big moment, losing somebody like Vincent Carroll, and this was the first time I saw more coverage of the hedge fund owners of the Denver Post and really pointing to that problem, that the Post is making money, but the hedge fund owners doing something terrible with it. Will that have ramifications?
I don't know if it has ramifications. It's a one newspaper town. You flash back not all that many years ago, where you not only had two papers, you had two robust papers with strong and differing editorial voices. Now you have one paper, it's shrinking on a daily basis. The amount of local content it generates is shrinking. This one, when I heard the word on, I guess it was Wednesday, shortly before it was announced that Vincent Carroll was taking this buyout package, it was one of those comparable to when our former table mate Lynn Bartles took a previous buyout that sort of took your breath away or made you sit back. First of all, mega kudos to Vincent Carroll. At two newspapers in town, over many, many years and decades, he really established a name for himself, not only as a supremely intellectual guy, but just a decent guy, somebody that whether you agreed with him or disagreed with him, the door was open. He was always open to a rational, intelligent conversation. He will be missed. Chuck Plunkett will be very capable, but Vincent will be missed. Joanne Ostro, and then there's a whole list of names. I won't read it. Westward had it online this morning, but David Olinger has been one of the finer investigative reporters over there. Cyrus McCrimmon is a friend who's a very talented photographer. I'm not going to read the list, but there are 20-some names. These are both careers that have been cut short because the newspaper industry continues to hemorrhage. And secondly, it's content that us as news consumers will no longer have access to. It's talent gone by the wayside. I find it very sad.
Susan, at your website, coloradoindependent.com, I've been heartened to see some of the former stars in the Post, both yourself, Mike Litwin, Mike O'Keefe, among many more folks. Hopefully, will we see more of your former colleagues of the Post maybe joining other media outlets here in town?
Yes, I wish I could make a couple announcements, but it's a bit premature, but absolutely. Also, our phone is ringing off the hook, for sure. There's still such a need and such a hunger for journalism in this state. What happened at the Post was the very slow, gradual decimation of that newsroom to now at 1/3 of what it was at its peak. And what they've ousted, essentially, is institutional knowledge. So if you don't read the Post, and many people don't, you still, as a sort of member of our community, want to know that somebody is watching power, the halls of power in this state. And with every buyout and with every person leaving, and with every sort of new 20-something person, as talented as they may be, you're losing that institutional knowledge, and you're losing that sort of watchdog role that the media plays. What also has been lost there is joy. It's a joyless newsroom, and I know because I worked in it. And from the time that the Rocky went under until the time I left, when they were actually spiking my columns, which is pretty intense, that place became like, I've said this on the show before, a bank. It became like working in a bank. And when we saw those Denver Post journalists marching in front of that building, I think it was last week, against that hedge fund, and when I heard some of the people there are the most careful, the people who are still there often are some of the least outspoken people, and that's why they are still there, let's be clear, okay? And when I heard some of them, and I won't name names, say things like, I had nothing to lose but get out in front of this building. That place has been gutted already, we have nothing to lose. People who will go back, when you asked Eric, will there be repercussions? I think you were asking, are those people going to get slammed by this hedge fund for speaking against the hedge fund? I wouldn't doubt that they will, but I think they feel like they have nothing to lose. And we, as much as we compete against the Denver Post, it's really what my grandmother would call a shonda for all of us in Yiddish, that newspaper is shrinking so much.
Patty, we're running out of time, but what is your reaction to the recent buyouts at the Post?
Oh, well, it's just so sad. And here is what is scary about it, besides the fact that you've lost 2/3 of the newsroom. they did not get the number of people they wanted in this buy-off. So now we heard there was a lot of arm twisting over the last week for people, get out now or you might lose your job. Now we could say layoffs too. So it's a sad day.
David, wrap it up for us.
Alan Salazar, the former aide for Senator Udall and Governor Hickenlooper, said that Vincent Carroll was the Edmund Burke of Colorado. That's accurate. He's one of the great Colorado journalists of all time. And besides what everybody could see from him in public, I was a columnist for the Rocky Mountain News for 9 years, and he was a fantastic editor that really brought up everybody and their quality and professionalism.
Let's get to our favorite part of the show, Disgrace of the Week. As always, Ms. Calhoun starts us off.
Well, I am bringing a mailing that came in the very ugly DA's campaign. There's a PAC supporting Michael Kerrigan. It's not his campaign, it's the PAC's campaign, but horrible pictures of Beth McCann, and in this case, a very badly misquoted article in Westworld from 1993. I'm tempted to vote against it just because of this.
We never know. Westworld.com may have actually said that, but we will never know. David.
Well, when that Yul Brynner robot went crazy, it did cause a lot of problems. The University of Northern Colorado, again, their disgrace this week is there was an incident on campus where two professors taught classes where they offered students readings on both sides of controversial issues. And a couple student cry bullies complained about that, and so the administration counseled the teachers, the professors, about how they need to change their teaching methods. It's really questionable whether we should have a state conversation about whether the taxpayers should keep on dumping money into that cesspit of conformity.
Eric.
The United States Supreme Court on the University of Texas affirmative action ruling, there is a moral case certainly to be made in favor of affirmative action. Last I looked, the Supreme Court should not be in the business of making moral decisions. Their job is to interpret the law. I find it impossible to read the U.S. Constitution and the Equal Protection Clause and see how it is possible to classify and discriminate based on race.
Susan.
The Michael Hancock's administration in the city and county of Denver, the city sold the bonds to build a new detention center downtown by saying they wouldn't have to hire any more sheriffs, and they would work very diligently to keep the inmate population down. Now the inmate population is at or near capacity, if not over, and the Hancock administration refused yesterday to release the numbers of how many inmates are in that jail, which is public information.
Wow. We have a disgrace of the week from one of our viewers, Alex Tights, who says the Downtown Denver Partnership for taking too long to increase security on the 16th Street Mall. The mall is one of Denver's biggest tourist attractions, but the increased documented incidents of violent crime only served to increase fear in the mall. The DPD hired a new security person, but it's taken weeks to announce a plan to combat the problem. So if you want to have your disgrace of the week or say something nice read on the air, be sure to go to our Twitter or Facebook page. And rather quickly, we're already over time. Say something nice about somebody. Patty.
Denver's music scene, it's a great local scene, and Westworld is celebrating it tomorrow with an all-day showcase.
David.
The people of the United Kingdom who exercised the same choice that the American people did on July 4th, 1776, to dissolve the political bands that connect them with another and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them.
Nicely presented. Eric.
My friend that I get to sit next to on this particular program in these ugly shirts, who's been through an ordeal over the last couple months and handled it with incredible grace, as is her style, and all's going to be well.
You're here. Susan.
Thank you. David Olinger, who's leaving the Denver Post, who is a fantastic investigative journalist and has given us some of the best investigative journalism we've had in the state over about a decade and a half.
That's all the time we have tonight. Thanks for tuning in. I want to tell you a quick thing about next week. You're going to love this. It is our annual Time Machine episode. We go back this time to 1876. That's right, 140 years back to the first year of statehood for Colorado. It's absolutely fantastic. That's going to be on July 1st at 8 p.m. We're back better than ever on July 8th. Thanks very much for tuning in. For everyone here at Channel 12, I'm Dominic Dizzuti. Thanks for watching. Good night. Welcome to the June 24th, 2016 edition of Colorado Inside Postgame, a special web exclusive production here on Channel 12. Let's get a quick take on the 16th Street Mall making headlines this week for all the wrong reasons. Denver police announced a plan to crack down on panhandling on the mall after reports of a recent assault of a businessman in the middle of the afternoon. Patty Calhoun from Westward, this was among many headlines we've seen over the last few months. We're seeing some reaction, but is it enough?
No, it isn't enough. And what's interesting, how hard is it to figure out, they're coming up with a security plan that's been in the works for a year. How hard is it to figure out, get more security people down there early? I mean, you could figure that out on day one. This weekend they're having the start of their Meet in the Streets plan, which is to reactivate the mall. This plan calls for moving the mall buses to 15th and 17th. Because there's no problems with traffic on 15th and 17th. And instead activating the mall and having more people out there and more events, and that's fine for the weekends, but the thing that is working on the mall is that bus. People love that bus. Tourists love it, people in town use it. They use the mall. It's what happens off the bus that's the problem. And I think getting security out there, acknowledging the problem, not having shorter waits than 15 minutes, which is what came up with a stabbing victim recently, to get help, you need to have security out there.
David Kopel from the Independence Institute and DU Law School. It's a popular urban center. Denver is growing. It's going to continue. It's not going to immediately lose its popularity, but it's getting that kind of reputation. What needs to be done to protect that kind of an urban center?
Well, when people report crimes, the police should do something about it. So Amy Cook, the executive vice president of the Independence Institute, has an apartment on the mall, and she saw a crime in progress and called 911, and 911 said, oh, we're not going to do anything about that unless the property owner calls. You know, this is the mayor's doing a terrible, you know, the mall should be the centerpiece of Denver, but it's getting deservedly so a reputation as a dangerous place. You know, it's, think of like Yankee Stadium in the Bronx. That was a place where, yeah, you go to see the game and you park, and then you, after the game, you get to your car quickly and you leave the area. You don't linger in the neighborhood. And under the Hancock administration, downtown Denver is moving in that direction.
Eric Sonneman, political analyst. If you were advising the Downtown Denver Partnership at this point, what would your advice be?
I'm not sure how many levers the Downtown Denver Partnership has. I think the city has most of the levers. The Downtown Denver Partnership does not have a police force. The city has a police force. The mall is a showcase. It should be one of Denver's primary showcases. Now, most people I know avoid it almost at all costs. Whenever I'm down on the mall, I try to make it quick. I try to be purposeful about where I'm getting. I don't stop at a kiosk. I don't stop and get a hot dog or whatever. I'm very purposeful, and I'm looking over my shoulder. A couple of nights ago, my wife was downtown to meet a friend who was in town at the convention center. And they very consciously did not go to the mall for dinner. They stayed away from the mall. They ate some restaurant over on 14th. So it has an economic impact. It has an impact in terms of our reputation. I don't know a lot of answers. I mean, I'm not one that wants to violate civil liberties. But I think within the realm of respecting people's civil liberties, I would go back to what Rudy Giuliani did years ago in New York in cleaning up New York City, which is the broken windows theory of policing. In this case, it's not broken windows, but what that is code for is enforce every little law to make it untenable and uncomfortable to be there if you're up to no good. I don't have a better answer than that. At least that's where I'd be for starters.
It's funny you bring up the whole reputation of the mall, but we had some professional colleagues come in from PBS just a few months ago. I think it was last August, and they stayed near the mall. And our office of the studios, Channel 12, or in the Five Points neighborhood, probably so for over 20 years, they decided to walk. And Five Points is great and it's starting to grow and get better, but it's been a gritty neighborhood for much of the last 20 years. And to a person, the colleagues that had to walk from the middle of 16th Street Mall all the way down to Five Points felt far more comfortable in our Five Points neighborhood 6 months ago than they did walking down the mall. And as a native Denverite, that shocked the bejesus out of me. That was incredible. Susan Green from the ColoradoIndependent.com joins us. It's a multifaceted problem. I get the fact of respecting rights of whether it's urban travelers or the homeless and the different services needed. What's the right solution Denver needs to do to help the 16th Street Mall?
Not freak out because a guy got stabbed. Let's be clear, this is not Compton, this is not East New York, it's the 16th Street Mall, and it gets mallier every year. It gets more Jamba juicier and Larkburgerier every year. And a guy got stabbed there, as do many people in other parts of the city, many more people in other parts of the city with far fewer headlines. Let's be clear about that. The fact that there are people panhandling, this sort of fear of the urban travelers. Well, there have always been urban travelers in Denver. It's a sort of junction town. People pass through, they panhandle, and also we have a really major housing crisis on this Front Range, and people need to panhandle, and they do it there because that's where the tourists are and that's where the crowds are. And I don't think the answer is really a police state on the mall. I think the answer to some of the panhandling is much more complicated than that. I still think people can feel perfectly safe doing their yoga and visiting their inflatable animals this weekend on the park without getting stabbed.
It's a good point, and I have to tell you that Larkburger is now my favorite adjective.
Oh.
That was absolutely fantastic. That is all the time we have for Colorado Inside Out postgame this week. Leave us a comment, tell us what you think. For everyone here at Channel 12 and CPT12.org, I'm Dominic Dezzutti. Thanks for watching.